Welcome to episode 4 of the Risk Takers Only podcast, the podcast to get you motivated, inspired, taking action and taking risk and moving you closer to financial freedom. I'm your host, Mike Upshire here. Man, it's Thursday. This week has been phenomenal. I had let's just say not a networking event, but I had an event that I hosted at the Kia Center for the Magic versus the Nets. And I had a couple friends, investors, potential investors, and that went extremely well. Everyone had fun. My Orlando Magics, they whooped the Brooklyn Nets ass. I think we whooped them by like 20. So it's been a great week thus far, guys. We've been getting a lot of good feedback on the last episode 3 with my boy Ron Jennings on our car sharing business. So if you haven't checked that out already, I'm going to put the link below. Please check that out today. But today I got a good episode for you. So episode 2, we talked about the freight brokerage and we went into depth about what is a freight broker versus a freight agent and just how to get into the industry. And so today I want to give you firsthand knowledge. Again, the purpose of this podcast is for you guys to be able to hear a plethora of industries that I'm in, that my partners in my network is in, and give you the opportunity, again, to get closer and achieve financial freedom. And so today we're going to talk about the freight agency model. And this is what allowed me and my company in year 2 to be able to net $250,000. And again, this is a low barrier of entry business, but it's $1 trillion industry, and you can make a living. You can have a home here in this industry. So let's talk about it. What is a freight broker first? For you guys who do not know, what is a freight broker? A freight broker facilitates the transportation for a shipper and a motor carrier. So they facilitate the transportation of freight goods for a shipper, between the shipper and the motor carrier. And so right now you're wondering, when we talked about the freight brokerage, that was the main point. And so the freight brokerage, it comes with some type of cost to get in. There is some calls and barrier to entry to get in. Again, your calls on that is going to be between $1,500 up to about $3,000. You're going to have to get insurance. You're going to have to get a license. You're going to have to get a surety bond to be able to operate as a freight broker. Now, what is my company, MZM Transports? We are a freight agency. A freight agent is the person, whether it's an independent contractor, that can be a group or an individual person that works under the freight broker. A freight agent works under the freight broker, their authority, their license, and they still do the same thing. They facilitate the transportation of freight from the shipper and the motor carrier. And so as a freight agent, again, you can be one person or you can be a group. And so for me, my company, MZM Transports, we are a freight agency. And I know you guys don't hear that terminology a lot. And so just letting you know, I'm giving you game. So my freight agency, I'm going to give you our blueprint on how we made $250,000 in year 2. All right. So starting off, guys, why would you pick a freight agency? A freight agent or freight agency model? Why would you pick that? So for you guys right now who's starting off, who have a lot of hustle, have a lot of heart, have all those attributes, but you may not have the startup cash, the capital, this is the opportunity for you. As a freight agent, your overhead cost is 0 to none. Now you can create your overhead costs. You can create an LLC that you may have to pay for. You can make a website. All of that you can create on your own. But to get started, all you need to do is have your social security card and to be able to work in the United States. You have to find a broker that allows you not just to be an agent under them, but to be an agency. And the difference between an agent and an agency, the agent serves directly under the broker. So the broker has freight that they get from the shipper. The broker communicates between the carrier. They have their own book of business. As the agent, you help move the freight for the broker's book of business. As the agency, you bring your own book of business to the broker and you sell and create your own business within that broker. They do take a percentage, again, depending on the brokerage, that depends on the percentage that they're going to take. But as an agent, your overhead cost is 0. They give you your load boards, which we'll talk about. They'll give you access to, you obviously are working under their license and authority. And so the reason why we chose this is not just obviously the overhead costs. We didn't have to pay anything to get started, but not knowing anything in the industry, it gave us a chance to be able to come in and learn without having to pay. And with this knowledge, we can focus and do what we do best, which essentially as a freight agent, your job is to sell. Okay. And so MZM Transports, we are a freight agency, and the blueprint is going to get started like this, guys. If you haven't already, I want you to go ahead, grab your pens, grab your pencils, grab a notepad. I want you to go ahead, get your coffee, grab a little beer, whatever is your thing. And I want you to get ready because I'm going to give you the game right now. If you haven't already too, guys, please comment below, like and subscribe, the Risk Takers Only podcast. Okay. When I first got started, the whole reason why I started the freight brokerage and getting into the transportation industry is because I wanted to be a part of a $1 trillion industry without having to pay thousands, hundreds of thousands of dollars, quote unquote, for a truck. And so when I first got into it, my wife was the one who got us started. She was the one on the phones handling a lot of the sales calls, moving the freight. And so first getting started, guys, you're going to have shippers. Shippers is the number one thing. If you log on right now to YouTube and you type in freight broker, you're going to see countless videos on how to talk to shippers, how to negotiate, sales tips, who to call, how to find the shippers. There's a lot of information. But again, I'm going to give you a very simple way on how I got started. You know, I got an interesting story. So number one, point blank period, I paid for a mentorship that when I paid for the mentorship, it came with leads that I was able to immediately call and contact and start business. And so the number one way to find shippers is to be able to find a coach or someone that already has leads to be able to get you started and cut out all of the fluff. And so if you do need that, if you need a coach or a mentor to kind of help you out and get started, I have well over enough leads and knowledge to be able to help you get started and kind of skip the line from what others have experienced. So I have not experienced the doom and gloom like you'll hear online. But at the end of the day, too, getting the shippers hasn't been too hard. And so the number one for me has been mentorship. You know, I was able to skip the line by just paying for mentorship and someone be able to give me their leads from their book of business. Also going into it. So I had a story. When I first got started, a part of the mentorship, I was told to be able to go on the back. And if you look, maybe like, let me see. If you have like any type of like good, look on the back and you'll see like the manufacturing label on it, right? And you'll normally see it will say shipping or manufactured by. And that is the business that you're looking for. The shipper or the manufacturer, whoever makes that good, is who you're moving the loads for. So that is your book of business. And so when I first got started, the first thing I did is I went in Home Depot and Lowe's and I just started looking at all of the raw goods, like the lumber, plants, and I just started the mulch, the soil, and I was looking on the back to see who it was manufactured by. And those were my leads. Those are the shippers that essentially I started to contact. Yes, I went in Home Depot and Lowe's, not looking to buy anything, looking on the back and identifying different shippers and manufacturers. And then I would go on Google and I would just type the information in and I would get the phone numbers and I would call them. And my very first shipper that I got was from calling, I think it was a lumber company. I called the lumber company, and when I called the shipper, I really didn't know what to say. I was new. I knew that I would need their quote unquote, what is called a load list to be able to start moving their freight. And so all I said is she introduced herself. She said, "Hey, this is Sam from so-and-so." And I said, "Hey, Sam, I didn't get access to your load list this morning. How do I get access to it?" And I guess that played into her hand. That's another little sales tactic, by the way. But she said, "Hey, I don't get my load list out by email. I send it out individually. I don't do a chain email." And so long story short, that short conversation, she said, "What's your email?" I gave her my email. And, long story, we had to get set up with her. But we started getting freight sent from her immediately. And those calls took me about, I would say, 30 days. 30 days of me going in Home Depot, going in Lowe's, looking on the back of labels, manufacturers, and just calling shippers and manufacturers. And again, that is one of the hardest parts, but I'm just letting you guys know of that because it was something that allowed me to see, really who my target, client was. When you get in the industry, you don't really understand, okay, how are you going to make your money? Of course, you need shippers, but who are shippers? What is the difference between a shipper, a manufacturer, or a distributor? And that's something that I had to really understand. A distributor could be just a middleman. There's a shipper or someone who made the good that now is in the distribution warehouse, and they're just the one who just, make sure that the commodity or the freight gets out there. They're not the one who has manufactured and made that good. And that is the person that you're looking to do business with. And so again, I first got started by doing, you would call it the hard method. I put in some sweat equity, and I physically got up, drove out, and again, Home Depot and Lowe's, and I did my work there. The next thing is very easy for you guys. Everyone has access to this. Google. I will go on Google, and based off of the type of good or freight or commodity I will be looking for, I would type, let's just say, for instance, for me, I was looking for, again, mulch, soil, lumber, steel, and I would type in mulch manufacturers, soil manufacturers. And when I would type them in, you would see a long list on Google of just different companies who made mulch, made soil. And from that point on, I would just literally grab their number, grab their name, and I would just call. And I'm looking for the dispatch department. I'm looking for who is in charge of shipping. And again, for me, I was so new. I really didn't have years of experience to tell them, hey, I have this truck available and I'm going to be able to do this for you. The only thing I was calling them and telling them was, hey, listen, I'm here to solve problems. Whatever your biggest problem is, whatever the lane that no one wants is the lane that I want. The lane that no one wants is the lane that I want. That was my pitch. Again, I say this on every podcast. Hard work beats talent when talent fails to work hard. And so I knew that, okay, everyone is working hard, or everyone wants to have the good freight, but who's going to work hard on the freight that they really need help on? That's what really solves the problem. And again, the number one thing for me is if I can solve the biggest problems, I know I'm going to get paid the most. I'm going to know, I know I'm always needed in the marketplace. And so that was my number one thing. When I would call shippers, I would let them know, hey, listen, I'm looking for the problem. I don't need an opportunity. What is the load that no one wants to move? And so that's how I usually got my opportunity. And so Google was another way of how I got shippers. Most of my shippers honestly came from Google. LinkedIn is something that I am still tapping into completely, but it is something that has gotten me a lot of traction. And I'm not talking about just the regular LinkedIn. I'm going to give you guys a little tip. LinkedIn Sales Navigator. LinkedIn Sales Navigator. I think it's $99. And no, I'm not advertising for LinkedIn. And LinkedIn, if you do see this and you see a lot of my friends and my people that follow me coming to you, just know, cut the check. But LinkedIn Sales Navigator. What I started to do, the method that I told you about, cold calling and going to like Home Depot and checking the manufacturers, those, to be honest, those methods are just, it will teach you about what the difference is between a shipper, a manufacturer, someone who, distribution center, different things like that. But the main thing is it's just not scalable for you to keep going out there by yourself. The main thing for me is, when I did this, I wanted to make phone calls in volume, and that's how I went on Google and I grabbed all the companies in Google and in the areas that I were at to allow me to make value calls. I wanted to be able to make 100 calls, and I said, hey, if I make 100 calls, of course I'm going to get one or two, right? And so that was a shotgun method that I did. But then also I wanted to get very particular on each load. Each customer that I had. And so I started doing the sniper method. And when I went on LinkedIn Salesforce or Sales Navigator, it allowed me to be able to type in certain criterias of shippers and manufacturers that I can find. And my target for me, if you guys want to know, I would target companies that are 500 employees or less. Because when you're going first off as a freight agent or a freight broker, whatever niche that you pick in the freight brokerage industry, you think it's all about the shippers. And so you're trying to call any and everybody, and you think that if you land maybe, let's just say Pepsi, Gatorade, a big company, now you're going to get a big contract, and that's not what it is. You make a lot of your money from the small to mid-sized companies. They're the ones who need your help. A lot of the companies that you're speaking to, they have their own assets, and so they really don't need your help to move their freight. And so when I used to target my customers, my shippers on LinkedIn Sales Navigator, we would type in 500 employees or less, which again, small to mid-sized companies, and we would pick industries that we knew were needed. You can look at chemical manufacturer, you can look at mulch and soil manufacturers, steel, lumber, whatever industry that you chose to get into, you can target that. You can target the type of role that they have. You're targeting dispatchers. You're targeting shipping managers. And so you click that search and you come up with any and everybody in the target radius that you pull that all hold that title. And so that is your version of what I would call a warm lead, because now what we would do is we would follow that person on LinkedIn and we would message them. And so now we have a warmer approach versus a cold call. They can't see us, touch us, feel us, but on at least the LinkedIn, they can at least see us. They can see a little bit about our bio and our brand. And that's helped me out a lot and gave me traction. And I remember, I have a story, to tell you guys about, on LinkedIn and finding a shipper that I worked on. So, we're going to get to that. But LinkedIn Sales Navigator, guys, again, that is something that you guys want to be able to use to start finding shippers. It's $99 a month, and that allows you to be able to have a good combination of warm leads versus your cold calls. Again, most of my cold calls came from Google. My warm leads are coming from LinkedIn Sales Navigator. Listen, I'm giving you guys the game. I'm just giving you guys the game. Okay. When you're talking about, finding the shippers, the one thing that I want to say is that the shippers are not the only thing, because once you get the shippers, it's like, okay, what do I do with it, right? And so now when we start to get the shippers, the first thing that they're going to start doing. So yes, you called, you marketed, you cold called, you emailed, you finally got someone that says, yes, I'm going to give you the time of day. I'm going to give you my freight. Okay, give me a quote. How do you quote the freight? Because that's another thing that we had to learn. So once you get the shipper, you got to learn how to quote the freight. Quoting the freight, this is what we do. We use a couple different options to quote freight. We use load boards. Load boards are going to be like DAT, Internet Truck Stop, Trucker Tools. Load boards allow you to post your freight, what we call the spot market, to be able to have carriers that are looking for loads that do not have contracted freight. They don't have any freight to move. So they go on the load board to see what is available in the area that they want to go to, where they want to pick up at, in the area that they want to go to. And so we use load boards to be able to tell us what is the average rate per mile. Now, the load boards, you can't always go off of that 100%, but the load board will tell you based off of the number of lanes available in that area that fit the criteria of the lane that you're marketing or you're advertising. And so I'll give you an example. Let's just say I have a lane coming out of Chicago, Illinois, and it's going into Cross City, Florida, right? And so I need to find a truck for that. I don't have a truck, and so I will post that lane on a load board, and essentially calls will come in to be able to book that load. So there are, thousands of shippers, brokers that post loads on the load board looking for a truck. And based off the prices that you see posted on the load board, it's going to dictate an average. And so you have load boards, again, like DAT and Internet Truck Stop, Trucker Tools, that have, shippers, manufacturers, brokers that post those loads, and it spits out that average. And so we use that DAT, that Internet Truck Stop, that Trucker Tools average to be able to determine part of our quote. What we do, number two, is by the carriers. When you post a load, you're going to get a lot of calls from carriers. You can call out to carriers by using these load boards. You may know carriers personally that drive trucks that can help you quote the freight for those lanes. Carriers are going to give you a lot of feedback that is valuable in the lane, not just what the rate it is to them in their eyes, but also, the pros and cons about that lane. And so again, the carriers will give you a lot of feedback to be able to give your customers the quote, because essentially they're the ones who are going to be picking up the freight and delivering it for you. Also, we work off of what I call scarcity. Again, that same load that I was telling you about that we have from Chicago, Illinois, going to Florida, that same load, when you post it, the average rate per mile may be $800 or $1,000 for that lane. But when you look on the board, you see two other people that have that lane posted, and their lane is posted for $700. And so at the end of the day, you're thinking, okay, when I say scarcity, there's only two people on that board who have that lane available. So if a driver is looking and they need to go back home, and home for them is Florida, they're trying to go from Chicago, they're trying to get to Florida. And so again, they're only left with two lanes on that board to choose from. And so if your lane is the highest out of the three, again, who's going to win? And again, that's the scarcity. Even though the lane average may say it's $1,000 because there's only three loads available, and that's the highest one, the pricing is going to be a little bit different because of that. And again, your job as a broker is to save your customer money. And you hear a lot about the carrier and the broker relationship. And we can talk, about that all day. But your job at the end of the day, you would not be in business if the customer did not give you loads. And the carrier has to move the freight for you, but you and the carrier would not have a job to do if the customer didn't give you that freight. And so at the end of the day, you have to be able to, not just move the load, but also it helps when you have save them money on their operating costs and their shipping costs. Load boards, we talked about the carriers, we talked about scarcity. We're going to talk about what loads that you've moved in the past. So if you've moved a couple loads before, again, you get that load, and you're quoting that freight. If you move some of the loads in the past, you can always go back to the prices that you moved them for, and you can understand, okay, where you need to be at to properly quote that freight. And so all of that together is going to allow you to be able to give your customer a proper quote, to be able for you to make money on that freight, and for the carrier to make money and the customer to be able to get the freight moved and for them to save money. And so just a little trick for you. When we first got started, my goal wasn't to make $1,000, $2,000, $3,000 margins off the load. My goal initially was just to make $100. And so the way I broke it down, I said, okay, if the brokerage for me, and I'll let you guys know a little bit about my business. If my brokerage takes 30% from me, and I want to say, let's just say I want to net the new 100K, which is $250,000. That means I would have to make about $300 and something thousand before the broker takes their 30% for me to net that 250. And so what that number really equivalated to was I would have to do 14 loads a day at $100. 14 loads a day at $100. And so for me in this industry, it's about volume. Again, when you first get started, everyone wants to make a lot of money and hit a home run, but you need to learn the industry, and it's about volume. And I only price my load for $100. And so when you're giving the quotes, it's as simple, again, as going on the load boards, talking to carriers, looking at past loads that you've moved, looking at the amount of loads that are posted, going on the load boards and seeing the truck count, how many trucks are coming into that area versus coming out. And the national truck count, guys, what that means, trucks going into a certain area. Let's just say my load, again, from Chicago, Illinois, going into Florida. There are, let's just say, 300 trucks coming into Florida, but there are only 100 trucks going out. What that means is that there are more trucks delivering into Florida than trucks getting the load coming out. And so that makes a difference in the price, because a carrier that goes into Florida is going to let you know, hey, it's hard for me to find a good paying load to get out of Florida. And so, again, Florida may be one of those areas that, hey, I may need a little bit more money on this particular load because I know it's going to be harder for my driver to get out, right? And so that's how you quote the freight. So now you got the shipper, you got the load, you sent the quote out to the shipper, and the shipper approved of your quote. Now the game begins. Now the load is on you to pick it up and deliver it on time, safely and secure. And that's your job as the broker. So now what? So how do we move the freight? Again, you've won the quote from the shipper. They approved your quote. So now you have to pick that load up and you have to deliver it. And you got to get it there safely and on time. So how are you going to do that? And so, guys, right now, this is probably the most important part of the entire podcast. Right now. So if you haven't been listening or tuning in too closely, I would advise you to get a little closer, tune in, and focus now. So how do you move the freight? Again, you as a broker, as an agent, you are not the one picking up the freight, driving to pick it up. You don't own the drivers that do that. You just facilitate it. And so you have to have a relationship with not just the shipper. We talked about how to get the shipper, but you have to have a great relationship with the carrier, which is the person who's going to pick that freight up from point A and deliver it to point B. How do you move the freight? The way you move a freight is by utilizing a motor carrier. A motor carrier is going to be the person who owns the asset, who uses the truck or whatever mode or vehicle that you use to move. You can use truck, you can do a rail, which means that train, you can do plane, you can do boat. And so those are all means of transportation. So we're talking about right now, how are you going to move the freight? For us, we operate with semis. Our niche is open deck. We're talking about flatbeds, Conestogas, step decks. And so for us, when we get that commodity, when we get that piece of freight, now what we have to do is find a carrier to connect that's going to pick that freight up and deliver it again from point A to point B. And so number one, first off, our team is set up uniquely. I do a lot of videos, and I know sometimes people look in our office because we just got a banging ass new office in Uptown Altamont, and it looks gorgeous. Everything is set up real nice. But the thing is, we only have 2 agents inside. And so I'm a big manifester. And the thing is, we got a Class B office space that's really nice, and we got it at a good price. And so in my office, we're building our U.S. based team. But getting started, it was just me and my wife. Me and my wife and 1 agent in the Philippines. And so this has been a little secret sauce for me and my family and just my business. We've always used virtual assistants. And what a virtual assistant is just someone who does the work for you that doesn't live in the U.S. They live outside the U.S., outside the country. And so we've used virtual assistants in the Philippines, Pakistan, India, Colombia. And usually what that does for you, why does that matter for you, is because it saves you money. The cost of money is a lot cheaper there. So, for instance, we could pay maybe someone in the Philippines $1,000 a month, and they'll give us 40 hours worth of work. And so if you're someone like myself, when we first got started, me and my wife, yes, my wife was on the phone, but the goal really quick was to replace her. We had opened up businesses before, and we knew that the goal wasn't for her to be a slave on the phone. We just wanted to learn it before we can replace her. And so we hired a VA, and we hired VAs. And so the way that we move freight with our shippers, so we're going to just break it down. So once we win that load, we go and we post it like I told you on the load board. And so on those load boards, what's going to happen is it's basically like marketing your load. And so tip number 1 right now, when you're marketing on the load board is like Google. And so when you type something in on Google, ask yourself, do you ever go to page 2, 3, 4, or 5 to find what you want on Google? Negative. And the load board is just like Google. And so when you post that load, the minute you post it, it goes right on the top. So if I'm searching for a load out of Chicago, Illinois, going to Florida, and I type that in and I just posted that load, and I'm a carrier who's looking for that load off that load board, that's the first load I'm going to find. And so the goal for you when you're posting is to stay at the top. And so when we post our loads frequently. We post them frequently to stay at the very top. Again, no one's searching on page 2. So we want to be at the top of page 1. And so when we post that load, we start to receive calls. And when you start to receive calls, those are carriers that have identified your load. And when you're posting your load, you're posting the weight, the commodity, the equipment needed, the price, special notes, special equipment. And so when you receive a call from that carrier has identified that information on your load, and he is calling because he wants it. And so the number 1 way that I got started moving freight was using the load board. That's what's called the post and pray method. So using the load board, the reason why they call that the post and pray method is because you literally post that load and you pray that a carrier gives you a call to book that load. And that's how we got started. When you first get started as a broker, again, you have a job because you're supposed to have a network of carriers. But again, getting started, you will not have a network of carriers. And this is how you build that network. You can call carriers and you can go and visit them and talk to them, but you won't know the market that is out there for your load until you post it and they start calling you. And so when you start getting those calls, you start talking to carriers and you start fielding those calls and seeing, okay, what equipment they have. Do they fit the needs for this? Do they have the special equipment? Do they have tarps? Will the rate work for them? We have agents in the Philippines that field those calls. Those calls come in frequently. And again, when they do come in, someone wants that load. You give them the right information and they say, hey, yes, I want to move that load for you. Then you book that load. And so for us, once we book the load, our agents in the Philippines, they send it to our admin department, which our admin team starts to type out a rate con. What a rate con is a digital receipt that basically states all of the information on that load, when you're supposed to pick it up, when you're supposed to deliver it, and any special notes or special requirements. And once the carrier signs and accepts that load, now they have had a legally binding contract that says this load, I'm going to be the one picking it up and delivering it. And so the agents on our back team, on our back end team and our admin team, they're the ones who type up that rate con. They're the ones who get it sent out to the get it sent out to the broker. Once the broker signs, then it goes to what we call our collections department. Our collections department is now in charge of making sure that the driver picks it up all the way to delivery. That is going to be one of the most important parts in moving the actual freight. It's actually making sure that you follow up with the carriers that you have moving your freight. So the admin team for us, they work on the front end, meaning that they're the ones communicating with the carriers. And then they work in the back end as well, sending out the rate count and the contracts to the carriers and making sure that the freight is actually delivered. And then, like I said, the post and pray model is something that we got started with right off the bat to be able to generate carriers. But once you start getting those calls and you start moving loads with certain carriers, you are going to need to build a network of carriers, which we're going to talk about here in a few. And the thing is, man, when we talk about this, moving the freight, that's the carrier's job. They're the ones who are actually picking it up. When we first got started, I really did not know, nor did I care about the carriers. Now, I'll just be honest. I was naive. I didn't know how the industry worked out. And that's why, year one, we did make some good income year one. But we could have made more if we would have focused on the carriers. And I'll tell you why. Remember I was telling you about the Sales Navigator on LinkedIn? $99 a month? Yes. I was using LinkedIn Sales Navigator and I found a shipper. This shipper was out of Iowa. And I noticed that the title was a dispatch manager. And so when I started to follow that person on LinkedIn, I noticed that also the title said that she just got hired 3 months ago. And so in my mind, what I'm thinking of, the little gem for you guys too, what I'm thinking of is that, hey, if I contact this person probably doesn't have a lot of brokers that they're working with because they're new in this position. And so it was in fact, she was new. And so she did give me the time of day. A lot of times the guys, again, when you're getting started and you're calling shippers and you're calling from Google and you're on LinkedIn and you're sending out emails and messages, it is a consistency thing. You got to send out a lot of them. I'm talking 50 to 100 calls and emails a day, right? And so it took me 3 months from first contact on Messenger, on LinkedIn, all the way to calls of us going back and forth, asking each other questions, me just checking in on her before she finally tendered me our first load. I gave her a quote. She said, cool, here's the load tender, which is basically the receipt that she's sending us to say, hey, listen, you can move this freight. Here's the load details. And from that point on, it took me 3 months again, 3 long months to get that customer. And in the span of 1 month, we lost her. We lost her from a simple issue of just not checking on the driver. And I can give you, I want to spend some time on this. We lost that customer again. I spent time and effort and money to get the customer. In 3 months, we lost her in less than a month for something simple. And so when we're searching so much for shippers, the number one thing that I've learned that allowed us to double our revenue in year 2 was that you have to build a carrier network, a network of carriers that you can rely on, that move that lane day in and day out. And so we're going to talk about building a carrier network. So like I told you guys, year 2 is when we started to see drastic increase. When I say drastic increase, we started to see our margins, the margins on our loads go up. Our customers were giving us more freight because we were more consistent. And the reason why is the carrier network. And so what is a carrier network? A carrier network is going to be a network of carriers that okay, they move this lane. That they move the lane for how much they move it for. Where their truck's located. And these carriers in your network, when it's time for you to get a load from your shipper, you don't have to post it on the load board. Remember I told you guys about the post and pray model? That is what we did originally to get started. And we still need to post a load on the load board sometimes when we're looking for a truck. But now our business is totally focused on the carrier network, our carriers that have moved the loads for us. Why? So the shipper that I got that took me 3 months to get that we lost in 1 month, the reason why we lost that shipper was because, one, we didn't send out a check call to check if the driver was still en route to pick up the load. But 2, we used a new carrier that we've never worked with, and the carrier's communication was horrible. And right before, probably an hour before they had to pick up the load, they just canceled on us. Now, we take responsibility for that part because we didn't check an hour prior to see if they canceled, but we anticipate that they're going to pick up. That was a newbie mistake, and they did not. And they canceled without telling us. And so that's because we use a new carrier. The new carrier, we were going to make $100 more on it, and we lost a customer that could have made us millions just to make $100 when we could have went with a carrier that we would have made $100 less, but we knew that carrier was going to bona fide pick that load up and deliver it safe, sound, and on time. And so that one instance really, that issue right there really changed the game for us, because at that point we're like, hey, it's not about the shippers. Once you get the shippers and you start moving freight, then you think, hey, listen, it's all about how many loads you can move. And that is the last thing. It is about making sure your systems, your operations, your back end can actually handle the loads that your shippers are going to give you. All right. And so, number one, building the carriers network. So that was what really opened my eyes to it. And so in year 2 for us, what we start to do is we start to identify the carriers that move the lanes that we get often. And how do we do that? We started using Pipedrive. Pipedrive is a CRM, very cheap CRM to use, and we purchased it. You need to get a CRM to be able to manage all the carriers that you have. You can try to manage it on a spreadsheet, which we do use a lot of Google spreadsheets and Excel spreadsheets, but you do need to use a CRM eventually at some point, especially when you're making money. You should invest in a CRM. We use Pipedrive, by the way. And so we started to move all the carriers that actually moved the load for us successfully. Not just move the load successfully, but they didn't give us any issues. They were on time. Communication was good. And we knew a little bit about the carrier to be able to build that relationship. And so we started to be able to add those carriers to Pipedrive. And the number one thing for me in my office and our agents is we always schedule follow-ups. We're always touching base with our carriers because we want to make sure that we know what's going on. Very seldom will you see a carrier in our network that we will not touch at least every month or 2 months. And so the reason why, again, we're here to build relationships. We know they're the ones to move the load, pick up the freight, and deliver it for us. They risk their lives by getting behind that truck. And so what we make sure to do is cultivate that relationship. Even if we don't have any freight to give them, maybe the shipper just doesn't have any freight at that time, we'll still call the carrier to still cultivate that relationship. So that's very huge for us. What we also started to do is we started to ask specific questions on the phone. Again, when I first got started, it was more so about booking the load, making the money. And I think that's like fool's gold for a lot of you guys out there, because you're rushing to be able to book a carrier and get paid. But if you take the time to ask a little bit more questions, and I'll give you 2 questions you should be asking your carriers while you're on the phone with them, right? So when you're talking to motor carriers, these are 2 questions that you should ask to vet that carrier. Number 1, I always ask, are you going out or are you coming in? What that means is this a backhaul for you? Are you going back home? Are you going out away from home? Because again, if I know where they're located, if I know where home is for them, I can coordinate my loads to be able to help them out the best and get them to point A to point B and where they want to go. So that's number 1. Number 2, I ask them, hey, how do they book their loads? How do they get their loads? Do they use a load board like I was telling you guys about DAT and Internet Truck Stop? Do they have contracted freight? Maybe they work directly with the shipper that has given them a contract. Maybe they work with a broker like myself. If I know how they get their freight, then I know how I can service them the best. So once I know where they're going and where they need to go, and I know how they get their loads, I know where I can come in and help service them the best. And that's my main goal. So those are 2 questions that you can ask on the phone with carriers that will allow you to not just know more about them, but build a real deep relationship to see how you can service them. Again, the biggest thing that I've learned is that if I don't have a carrier that's on my side, it doesn't matter how many loads I've moved in the past. You are only as good as your last load in this industry. You are only as good as your last load. So if I moved 100 loads in the past and I mess up on that one load that shipper's job is on the line for, trust me, they're going to be pissed off at me, not the carrier. Building a carrier's network has been big. Again, it's not about the number of shippers. It's about the systems you have in play to service your current shippers. And that's going to come with the carriers. Guys, as a whole, once you start moving the freight with the carriers, at that point, you understand the business. The business for you is creating relationships with motor carriers, creating a book of business with those carriers to be able to facilitate the transport of goods. And so now you just learned how to start a $250,000 plus business as a freight agent without any startup costs. I'm talking how to find your shippers, how to quote your freight, how you're going to move your freight, all of that. And so I want to leave you guys with this. If you guys have any type of hard work, any type of motivation, any type of background in sales, any type of background in leadership, The freight brokerage business is wide open for you. It's an industry that it just needs some reputable people. There's a lot of bad brokers out there. There's a lot of people who make promises and they don't keep those promises. If I tell a shipper I'm going to pick up a load and I can't find a truck, I'll come out of pocket and make sure that that shipper has their load delivered on time. And if you're someone who has ethics about them, morals, works hard, hustles, communication is high, is a leader, a go-getter, a hustler, this is for you. This industry is wide open. It's a $1 trillion industry. And if you're looking where to start, I want you to follow the link in the show notes, follow the link below, and comment, book a call with me. I got you covered, man. This is Mike with MZM Transports. This is the Risk Takers Only podcast, baby. Take care.